Welcome to part 5.2 of Exploring the XM, your consideration for my tabletop RPG homebrew system. Today we're looking at character progression, which is pretty much how your character gets entrenched in the mechanics and kind of starting point of the game. So rather than looking at character classes and things that you're used to maybe from D&D, this is fully built from the ground up. I think much more streamlined, also retaining that transparency so that you can look far in the future, far ahead. How do you want to build that character? What do you want to be working towards? Um, and also very flexible, so you're not going to be locked into any particular path, other than a few kind of little character quirks that you could choose at the beginning of the campaign. So let's go ahead and start by looking at upgrading main skills and subskills. This is pretty much all of the things that we looked at in a previous video on your main character sheet. The blue rows are your main skills, and the ones below those are their subskills. And pretty much, I'm not going to read through all of this, but you're going to start by upgrading a variety of those skills based on your choice through this step chart progression. So if it's starting at 1d4, it's going to go to 1d6, 2d4, etc., etc., and you're going to build out how good your character is at all of these skills. The next thing we're going to look at is cyborgs and the religious. So cyborgs are really tolerant to toxicity, these harsh environments. They're able to put up with them better than anyone. They're also really receptive to cybernetic installs, so it's really easy to put those on, and they even start with a couple cybernetics. Of course, the downside is some people are bigoted against cyborgs, so that might be something that in social encounters you kind of are up against. And at the same time, cyborgs start with this sort of deficiency in one of the main skill areas. So maybe you're a very frail cyborg, or maybe you're overly logical, and it's difficult for you to kind of socially connect with others. And so cyborgs offer a lot of RP opportunity, but there is give and take on both sides of that coin. Next is the religious, who rely much more on inspiration. And whereas a cyborg actually degrades their inspiration die by one step, which is a big deal, the religious are able to boost their inspiration die much more significantly. And then inspiration melds for the religious with karma, which means you have this very powerful resource that you're using sort of interchangeably, allowing you to more often shape the narrative in a more kind of direct way, and get out of those worst case scenarios. There is a little bit of downside, of course. There's people who don't care for the religious, and you're going to be facing that in social encounters. At the same time, you start the game without a couple of these other perk options that you only get if you're not religious, because maybe you spent a little bit more time, rather than praying, you were working in the shop, or you were working on yourself, etc., etc., and maybe you're better at some other things. Next, I believe we're going to be taking a look at choosing an archetype. Now, choosing an archetype is not nearly as kind of, it's not going to put you on a track, but it's going to be much more about how you start the game. So you'll see like the socialite. You're looking at what types of contacts do you have. You have a lot of contacts. You gain a step in style, which is upgrading that die in your style subskill. But you don't start with a lot of inventory, a lot of interesting inventory options. Your currency is your relationships. The wise guys are, really kind of, they're good in the streets. They have a little bit more streetwise understanding. You might be an expert in areas that the rest of your maybe naive party is not. The techies are going to be a good starting point to become net runners in the future. You start with that proficiency of programming, and you're going to have, some interesting tools to start working from there. You might be more likely to be the booster and the crafter for your party. You have dust to dust, where you've lived, a rough and tumble life, which gives you a little bit more max hit points, which 2d4 is nothing to scoff at, given how low of hit points general characters start with. And you also get greater carrying capacity, so you got more gear on you at any given point. You also start with a fair amount of inventory because you've been working it. You're burning the candle at both ends, and you've built up a little bit of something for yourself despite your tough life. And then you have the disgraced statesman, which you've been essentially disbarred from your work on the force. And that has created some very interesting good and negative relationships for you. Ones that you might be able to turn around, perhaps. And also, you had a decent job for a little while, and you might have some connections that can, get you into that state pipeline where it's going to be the most, influence that any of these characters can hope to strive for, although it's not guaranteed, of course. Next, we're going to have the Populate the Social tab. This is where you go into that Assets tab, and you're going to be putting in like that personality rundown and figuring out what makes your character tick, and maybe creating all of the stats and everything beforehand has inspired you how to fill in your traits and how you feel about people, your goals, what pisses you off, and maybe potentially some vices could fit in here, what you struggle with. Um, Next is going to be, we're looking at level up progression. So this is all predetermined, and there's tons of choices within here, but it's all stuff that you can plan out well in advance if that's the type of player you are. And you'll also notice that if you're religious, sometimes a little extra perk comes up, or if you're a cyborg, sometimes an extra perk comes up. And then as you get into the later levels, there's some interesting lifetime milestone missions. You might be upgrading feats. I believe now we're going to talk about feats. So feats are, again, pre-established. You could look at all of them from the get-go. Each feat has different point costs. You're generating those points over the course of your level ups. You can save them up for better feats, or you could spend them as you go. And these are all with their own little kind of feat tag name, and they all have very, very unique effects. And you get to decide, obviously well in advance or on the fly, how you want to build your special abilities for your character. Last but not least is moment cards. This is the only thing I'm not going to show you and scroll through, but moment cards are essentially a resource that you get upon completing each mission. And a moment card, it gives you the opportunity to get yourself into a scenario where you could do something fantastic. So let's say a moment card says if you're outnumbered by the enemy, you could play this one-time expendable moment card to do this, and it's this impressive moment of heroics, or maybe it's a flat modifier to a specific check type so that you can be more creative with it. But essentially, moment cards just give you these above and beyond one-time use abilities, but you need to get yourself maybe into a little bit of a stickier situation, or you need to set up circumstances so you can activate that moment card and make it really impactful. So I believe that concludes our character progression and what kind of your journey with everything's going to look like. Looking forward to seeing you in 5.3, and we're going to go over ship sheets.